16. Chelsea Wilson. In 2016, an unsuspecting father in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, found himself caught up in federal-level drama when he thought he was dropping his 24-year-old daughter off for a job interview. Instead, the young woman robbed a bank. He assumed that his daughter, Chelsea Wilson, was planning to work at the financial institution and simply waited in the SUV while she went inside. When Chelsea came back out to the vehicle with a massive amount of cash, he apparently did not find the situation even a little bit suspicious, despite his daughter wearing a wig, a hat, and sunglasses for the interview. The man later realized that Chelsea walked into the local TD Bank branch with a handwritten note demanding all the $50 and $100 bills in the cash drawer. She then made off with just $300 total. The robbery was similar to 3 others that had recently taken place in the area, and the evidence led federal investigators straight to Chelsea's home. She confessed to committing several recent thefts and said that she used the money to buy herself groceries. Records show that a woman of the same name and age was released from a federal prison back in 2019, indicating that Wilson had served some time behind bars for her crimes. It's uncertain what sort of relationship she has with her father right now, but we can only guess that robbing banks put a strain on their connection. 15. Nicole Palmer. When someone ends up in jail or prison, it's important for them to think wisely about their future, and it's always a good thing when a person sets their goals to make an honest living once they are given back their freedom. But one Florida woman named Nicole Palmer took a backwards approach to doing this and escaped from police custody in order to attend a job interview in early 2017 while participating in a women's work release program. The 26-year-old reportedly got on a public bus in Lake Worth towards the end of March and failed to return. After weeks on the run, Palmer apparently had a sudden change of heart and decided to turn herself in. She surrendered to the Broward County Sheriff's Office in May and was booked on an escape charge. According to the Florida Department of Corrections, participation in work release programs is typically reserved only for inmates with minimal time left on their sentences. The agency claims that prisoners benefit from programs like this by gaining valuable work-related skills as well as job placement. In other words, Palmer would have likely been released fairly soon if she had just stuck with the program. But her impatience got the better of her, and state records show that she was ultimately convicted of the escape charge. Palmer remained in custody for another 2 years before finally getting released back into the free world in March 2019. 14. Livia Ramos de Souza. In 2023, when 19-year-old Livia Ramos de Souza went to a job interview at Icon Investimentos in Rio de Janeiro, she had no idea that the company was actually scamming its customers by selling them cars that never existed. The timing of the interview could not have been worse for the unsuspecting young woman, who was simply trying to get her foot in the door when the company was suddenly raided by the authorities. According to Livia's family, the teenager was just 4 hours into a training session when the raid took place. She and 17 suspects between the ages of 18 and 30 were arrested at the scene on suspicion of fraud. Livia's mother, Christian Pinto Ramos, told local news reporters that her daughter was immediately put into computer training after arriving at the workplace. The young woman did not sign anything, did not make a single sale, and no money was ever deposited into her account, according to Christian, who was at work when she got a call from Livia saying that she had been arrested. Christian went to the police station to try and secure her daughter's release, but she was not able to do so. More than 10 days after the raid, she still had not gotten back into contact with Livia, who spent 16 long days languishing in a jail cell with a few of the most hardened criminals she had ever crossed paths with, including several accused murderers. According to the Brazilian news outlet Globo, Livia was looking for a job in order to help support her family. She saw the Icon Investimentos position on a work-seeking website and had no reason to suspect that she was walking into an illegal operation. Livia described the time she spent in lockup as a nightmare and was grateful when a judge decided that she and 14 of the other trainees who were arrested alongside her had not committed any crimes. They were later released from custody thanks to a lack of evidence and were free to carry on with their lives and their job searches. 13. Shanesha Taylor. 35-year-old single mom Shanesha Taylor from Phoenix, Arizona, was only trying to find a way to make ends meet when she left 2 of her 4 children in the car during a job interview back in 2014. The kids were discovered in Taylor's SUV while she was inside interviewing for a position at a State Farm insurance location in Scottsdale. Needless to say, someone saw the little boys alone in the hot vehicle and immediately called the police. So instead of getting the job that day, Taylor was arrested on suspicion of child abuse. She allegedly told law enforcement at the scene that she left her children in the car because she could not find affordable daycare, and her defense attorney argued that her client did not mean to harm the boys and that she was simply guilty of using poor judgment. Taylor ultimately pleaded guilty to the charges against her and entered a deferred prosecution program, which gave her the chance to avoid any serious convictions, so long as she agreed to follow certain strict court-imposed rules. As a contingency of her sentence, Taylor was required to contribute to a trust fund for her kids' future. Meanwhile, the case received national attention and had deeply divided responses from among the public. Many people had a lot of sympathy for the single mother's struggles and even contributed to a crowdfunding campaign that was made to help Taylor. The page actually managed to raise over $100,000. In response to the fundraiser, prosecutors increased the amount of money Taylor was required to contribute to the trust fund. But she missed 2 of her payment deadlines, so the state took the case back to court. Taylor allegedly said that she did not want to pay toward the trust fund since her kids would only ever see the money if they chose to go to college. But that was not a good enough excuse to shirk the requirement, according to the prosecution. So the authorities came down much harder on her the second time she missed the deadline. The state argued that Taylor lied under oath about being homeless when she was actually living with family members. Prosecutors expressed lingering concerns about Taylor's sense of responsibility, claiming that she turned down several job offers, while the defense asked the judge to let her move to Chicago, where she expected to have more financial support. Taylor's defense attorney denied allegations that her client rejected multiple job offers, claiming that Taylor had made a satisfactory effort in her journey to secure employment. The lawyer also noted that the defendant's status as a military veteran instilled her with a mindset that made it difficult for her to own up to her failures. Superior Court Commissioner Jeffrey Reuter conceded that Taylor acted purely out of economic desperation and described her behavior as criminally poor judgment. He also acknowledged that the struggling mother had followed all the other terms of her original sentence. Taylor was then re-sentenced to 18 years of probation in order to make sure that her kids would be adults by the time she was released from supervision. The judge also ruled that she would be allowed to apply for interstate travel so that she would be able to take the steps needed to relocate if doing so was in her best interests. While Taylor admittedly made a massive mistake, one can only hope that she has been able to put the past behind her and has managed to achieve financial stability for herself and her children. 12. Riley Leon. In March 2022, 16-year-old Riley Leon was driving home from a job interview at a Whataburger restaurant in Elgin, Texas, when he suddenly got caught in the middle of a violent tornado. The powerful winds knocked the teenager's red Chevy pickup truck straight onto its side and then flipped it back upright. Shocking footage of the storm showed the car being tossed around like a Hot Wheels toy before Riley managed to continue driving. Riley told local news station NBC5 that he had just called a friend to tell them he had gotten the Whataburger job when the tornado appeared almost out of nowhere. Not knowing what else to do in the situation, the teen held onto the steering wheel and just prayed. The truck was badly damaged by the storm and not entirely drivable. Riley was able to drive it far enough to get out of the road, then called his mom and spoke to the police. He came out of the ordeal with just minor injuries, including some scratches and a fractured back. He was devastated over the condition of his beloved truck, which had been passed down to him by his father and had a lot of memories attached to it. The story was all over the news and even caught the attention of a few staff members at the Bruce Lowry Chevy dealership in Fort Worth. The generous business gifted a brand new red pickup truck to the young man, as well as $15,000 for any other expenses he might need to take care of in the future. Riley's family was incredibly touched by the kind-hearted gesture, which moved them to tears. They went with him to the dealership to pick up the car, which may not replace the sentimental value of the truck that was damaged during the tornado, but will definitely get the grateful teen to and from his brand new job. 11. Ino Bong Umoran. A young Nigerian woman named Ino Bong Umoran left her house in the state of Akwa Ibom one day to go to a job interview last year and vanished. A close friend, who called her on the day she went missing, said that she answered the phone and started frantically screaming. Worried locals got a group together to search for Umoran, whose remains were discovered in a shallow grave on the property belonging to the family of a local man named Uduak Akpan. The suspect had lured the unsuspecting job seeker to his house under the guise of owning a farm and needing someone to work as his secretary for extra help. Akpan later told the press that when Umoran got to the property, he confessed that there actually was no farm and that he lied about having a job to offer the young woman because he wanted to have sex with her. He claimed that she agreed to his proposal as long as he used protection, which he took off during the act without the woman's consent. Umoran was furious and supposedly started to attack Akpan, who apparently hit her back and killed her. Police described Akpan as being a serial rapist in the community and accused a few of his family members of helping him to cover up the crime. Meanwhile, the defendant's dad claimed that Akpan suffers from severe schizophrenia, which alters his sense of reality, and that he has a long history of being hospitalized for his mental health issues. The suspect had already admitted to killing Umoran once, but took back his statement, claiming that he had a fever when he was getting interrogated, and that the police pressured him to confess to the crime. But this story did not hold up in court, and Akpan ultimately pleaded guilty to Umoran's murder. 10. Amber Dawn Waterman. In October 2022, 33-year-old Ashley Bush was about 31 weeks pregnant when she found an online ad offering baby items to expecting mothers in need. She quickly responded to the ad and agreed to meet up with the poster, a woman named Lucy, at a nearby library in Gravette, Arkansas. During their conversation, Lucy also offered to set Ashley up with a job interview for a company with work-from-home positions. Ashley eagerly jumped at the seemingly perfect opportunity, thinking it would rake in some much-needed income for her growing family. Her fiancé, Joshua Willis, helped by dropping her off at a convenience store where Lucy said she would pick Ashley up. The plan was for Lucy to take Ashley to the interview site, then drive her back over to the store where Joshua would take her home. But that never happened, because Ashley never returned from the interview. She was last seen riding in the passenger seat of an old tan pickup truck with a white woman in her 40s, the woman Ashley knew as Lucy. The woman's real name is Amber Dawn Waterman, and she was originally from Pineville, Missouri. She was 42 years old at the time, and she currently stands accused of luring Ashley to her death with the ad and the offer of a job interview, which turned out to be completely fake. Within a few days of being reported missing, Ashley's charred remains were located in a remote area near Waterman's property. Someone had fatally shot her, then covered her body in gasoline before setting it on fire. According to prosecutors, Waterman intentionally sought out a pregnant woman in a twisted bid to steal a baby and drove across state lines to both kidnap and kill Ashley. In this case, neither of the victims survived the ordeal, and Waterman is now facing a federal charge of kidnapping resulting in death. She is also charged in connection to the fate of Ashley's unborn child. Amber allegedly maintained her innocence with a bogus cover-up story during questioning, even though her husband, Jamie, reportedly admitted to helping his wife hide Ashley's dead body. The outcome of the case remains to be seen, as it is still making its way through the court. 9. Matthew Contreras. When his live-in girlfriend of several years came back home from work one day in 2022 and immediately fell asleep, 25-year-old Matthew Contreras got curious and decided to go through her phone. The young woman woke up to a string of cheating accusations based on a text conversation she had with a male co-worker, even though there was nothing going on between the two of them. Contreras had simply misread the situation from the text that he saw, but his mind was already made up. He wholeheartedly believed his girlfriend had cheated on him, and he allegedly beat her up in a fit of rage. According to the victim, he held a knife to her throat, used the blade to cut her hair, and even threatened her with a handgun, while placing the barrel up against her forehead and then into her mouth. The horrifying abuse continued as Contreras threw the woman down to the floor, kicked her, and doused her with bleach. She later told police officers that whenever she tried telling her boyfriend that she never cheated, he got even angrier. For over 2 days, he held her hostage. And while terrorizing his girlfriend seemed to be the man's main objective, he somehow made time to attend a job interview. He forced his victim into his car at gunpoint, along with the couple's 1-year-old son, and drove them across state lines from Texas to a prison in New Mexico, where he hoped to soon become an employee. During the drive, law enforcement pulled the car over for speeding, but the terrified girlfriend kept quiet and to herself. Contreras went into the job interview by himself, giving the woman a chance to finally escape. She managed to flag down an officer who works at the facility and was taken to a hospital to receive medical treatment. Meanwhile, instead of working at the jail, Contreras found himself locked up behind one. He posted a $100,000 bond and was released, but ended up back behind bars just a few days later on a weapons charge. A grand jury indicted the accused assailant later that year, and records show that he was convicted of kidnapping in October 2023. Contreras was then sentenced to serve 13 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. 8. Lyn Rogers. Lyn Rogers was just a teenager when 36-year-old Scott Singleton started obsessively stalking her in 1991. She was unaware that she was being stalked by the man, whose girlfriend lived near Lyn's house in southeast London. The young woman found out about her stalker in the worst way imaginable in September of that year, when Scott lured her to a fake job interview at Charing Cross railway station. Lyn failed to come home and was discovered murdered along a roadside in East Sussex just 5 days later. The disturbing tragedy happened at a time when Lyn was desperately searching for a job. She had submitted her resume to over 100 different employment agencies, with hopes of landing work somewhere, including a travel company called Africa Hinterland. Scott happened to own a business in the same shopping center she had applied at, and he took Lyn's resume from a communal mailbox the company shared. According to prosecutors, Scott called Lyn's house 4 times while claiming to be a representative from the travel company. He offered the teenager an interview for a well-paying flight attendant position, so it's only natural that Lyn easily took the bait. She also had no reason not to believe that the job offer was real and that the caller was an actual company executive. Something seemed off to Lyn's father and boyfriend though, so they warned her to be careful during the upcoming interview. But Lyn was simply so excited about the job prospect that she decided to go to the interview despite their warnings. She promised to call her loved ones afterward, but the phone never rang. As the night wore on with no word from Lyn, her father decided to contact the police and report her missing. After learning about the case, a taxi driver contacted the authorities and said that he had seen Lyn getting into a car matching the description of Scott's vehicle. It's hard to say exactly what happened between then and the time her body was discovered, but the experience was nothing short of horrifying, according to prosecutors, who said that Lyn must have realized at some point that she had been fooled and that she was in severe danger. Her body was discovered with graphic injuries, including bruising from a brutal blow to her head, as well as deep grip marks on her neck and arms from being restrained and strangled. She also had a bite mark on her chin, which matched up to Scott's teeth. Based on the amount of damage inflicted on Lyn's body, investigators speculated that she most likely tried to resist her attacker's advances, and that he was unwilling to take no for an answer. Scott's car was also seen in close proximity to where Lyn's body was found, but he denied having anything to do with the crime, despite all the evidence stacking up against him. He maintained his innocence throughout his murder trial, but was ultimately found guilty of the charge and sentenced to life in prison. During the sentencing, Lyn's father charged towards Scott and threatened to kill him while bailiffs held him back. It was an intensely emotional scene, which proved that even the most heavy-handed justice the country could offer would never bring Lyn back or heal her family's heartbreak. 7. Jing Kang. As the cost of living seems to endlessly skyrocket in San Francisco and the Bay Area in recent years, many people have felt pushed out of the region or have decided to leave in search of a more affordable area to live. But it's also the place to go for many of the best jobs in the tech industry, which is why 45-year-old Jing Kang traveled there all the way from Virginia in 2010 to interview for a job position at Google. Kang never made it to the interview though, because he was shot dead in a botched robbery while standing next to a rental car the night before the scheduled meeting. He was with his friend Hai Wang at the time, when the pair was suddenly ambushed by 26-year-old George Huggins Jr. and his former girlfriend, 36-year-old Althea Housley, not long before midnight. The Google hopeful had driven downtown to Oakland to get his teeth cleaned by Wang, who happened to be a dental hygienist. Just as the suspects had done in previous robberies, Huggins approached the male victim Kang, while Housley walked up to the female victim Wang. According to prosecutors, Housley grabbed Wang by the hair and forcefully threw her to the ground, while Huggins pointed a gun at Kang and ordered him to hand over his money. Kang said that he only had $17 on him, but he willingly gave it to the thief in hopes of avoiding harm. Despite Kang's cooperation, Huggins still fired 3 shots into his chest, killing him at the scene. The perpetrators then fled and were later arrested after being identified from surveillance footage taken from nearby businesses. Housley initially denied involvement in the crime, but admitted that Huggins was the gunman. She claimed that she did not know that anyone was going to be shot that night. She eventually confessed to her role in the botched robbery and agreed to testify against Huggins in exchange for a more lenient sentence. As part of the deal, Housley pleaded guilty to reduced voluntary manslaughter and attempted robbery charges. Prosecutors decided to drop the first-degree murder charge that she had originally been facing, and she was sentenced to 16 years in prison for her role in the crime. In addition to the first-degree murder charge Huggins faced for killing Kang, he was charged with robbing another man and woman in their 20s about a month earlier. The victims, who were both 26 years old at the time, were targeted in a similar fashion as Kang and Wang. They were in their car late at night and were caught off guard by the thieves. Huggins shot the male victim in the leg with the same .22 caliber handgun that he used to kill Kang. During Huggins's trial, his lawyer claimed that her client was innocent and that he was a victim in a case of mistaken identity. The attorney argued that the woman in the surveillance footage was actually Althea Housley, but that she was with a different man on the night in question. As you can probably imagine, the jury did not buy this story, especially considering the couple's history of committing crimes together, and Huggins was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was also convicted on 2 counts of second-degree robbery and is now serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. 6. Larry Andrus Jr. Florida and Ohio are pretty far from one another, which would likely explain why 48-year-old Larry P. Andrus Jr. felt like he could get away with looking for a job in Florida, despite being wanted for allegedly killing his stepfather in Ohio. According to law enforcement, Larry strangled 59-year-old Roy D. Watts to death after an incident at the victim's home in the Toledo area back in September 2023. It did not take long for investigators with the U.S. Marshals Service to determine that Larry was most likely on his way to Florida, where they thought he would try to find a job as a tattoo artist, considering what they knew about his previous work history. They alerted the Bay County Sheriff's Office in Northwest Florida, and the search for Larry was on. It took a few weeks, but detectives eventually found out that their suspicions regarding the fugitive's whereabouts were spot on. Larry boarded a Greyhound bus in Pennsylvania and was heading to the Sunshine State's Panhandle region, where he had a job interview lined up with a tattoo parlor in Panama City. But the suspected killer never went to his interview because he was swarmed by sheriff's deputies and U.S. Marshals while still on the Greyhound bus. Larry was then extradited to Ohio on charges of murder, voluntary manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter, strangulation, and felonious assault. He waived his right to a speedy trial and remains in custody of April 2024. 5. ESET Ninjana. In 2019, while waiting to be interviewed for a job at a hotel in Cape Town, South Africa, 23-year-old ESET Ninjana sat on a public bench and started snapping a few selfies to pass the time while she waited for someone to let her into the building. Just moments later, a police officer went up to the young woman and asked her what she was doing on the property. ESET explained that she was there for an interview, but the cop did not believe her story, since it was a Sunday and she did not think the business interviewed candidates during the weekends. The The overly suspicious patrolwoman then started searching through ESET's bag and threw her belongings onto the ground. Disturbing cell phone footage taken that day showed the officer rifling through ESET's purse and pulling out a house key with a garage door remote attached, which the officer accused ESET of using to break into and rob people's vehicles. ESET responded to the baseless allegation by explaining that the remote was not even working properly and that she was simply using it as a key holder. The cop did not believe her. She took ESET's phone, placed the woman into a police van, handcuffed her, yelled at her, and kept her in a jail cell overnight. ESET had to miss her job interview because of the commotion. Her mother went to the police station to try clear up the misunderstanding and clarified that the remote was in fact broken and that her daughter definitely was not using it to break into cars. ESET was finally released when, in the words of a law enforcement spokesperson, they determined that the chances of a successful prosecution were highly unlikely. After being unrightfully detained and degraded by someone she was taught to trust and whose job it is to keep people safe, ESET said that she was thinking about hiring a lawyer and complaining to the Human Rights Commission. She told the press that she was too embarrassed to go back to the hotel where she had the interview, but the story went viral and captured the business's attention. A manager later reached out to ESET and invited her to stop by for an interview. It went well, and she was offered a paid internship. She said that she was grateful for the opportunity, which would provide her with much-needed income to help support her family. 4. Tyera Lurel Alexander. The last thing Ciandora Holmes said to her 20-year-old son was goodbye and I love you, as he left his family's Gastonia, North Carolina house on foot for an interview at a Wendy's in March 2023. Tyera Lurel Alexander never came home or even made it to the interview, because he was shot dead multiple times after leaving his home while walking to the restaurant. By the time the young man was discovered lying motionless in the street near a restaurant and nightclub, it was already too late to save his life. Holmes told a reporter from local news station WSOC-TV that she did not understand who would want to gun down her son in broad daylight, or even why. Alexander's father, Charles Durham, said he knew that someone must have seen something and begged the perpetrator to do the right thing and turn themselves in. A few months later, prosecutors charged 18-year-old John Terrion Jackson and 21-year-old Marquand Tiger Nixon with first-degree murder in connection to Alexander's death. A third suspect, 20-year-old Anthony Deshawn Gwynn, was also arrested on the same charge in September 2023, 6 months after the tragedy took place. A police spokesperson said that the young men all knew each other, but have yet to reveal a possible motive for the crime. In the meantime, the suspects remain held without bond while awaiting their trial dates. 3. Zenel Nie and Akasukiliski Pettis. 32-year-old Zenel Nie and his girlfriend, Akasukiliski Pettis, were sitting in a pickup truck along a street in North Memphis, Tennessee in 2019 when someone started shooting at the vehicle. The couple managed to dodge the gunshots that day, but they were less fortunate a day later when they were both shot multiple times just a few streets over while on their way to a job interview. They were sitting in the same truck they had been in the first time they were shot at, indicating that the murder was targeted, not random. Zenel's mother, Belvetta Nie, told local news station WREG that she suspected the victims were killed in a dispute over gambling debts. She had seen her son just a few minutes before he was killed, when he stopped at her house on the way to the job interview that he never made it to. Belvetta said that Zenel's was the happiest she had ever seen him in a while, and that she would have never fathomed it was the last time she would see her son alive. Zenel's and Pettis left behind 3 children, who are currently being raised by their aunt. In early 2022, the family and law enforcement decided to reach out to the public through the media, hoping that someone would come forward with information that would lead to the killer. But there have been no updates on the case since then, which sadly suggests that the murderer still remains at large. 2. Crystal Watson. In 2017, 25-year-old Crystal Watson was on her way to a job interview in Houston, Texas, when she stopped at an apartment complex to drop off her daughter at a babysitter's place. By the pure unfortunate luck of simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time, she crossed paths with an enraged man who happened to be armed with a shotgun. later identified as 58-year-old James Michael Hickam. The man was a complete stranger to Crystal. After seeing her, he shot the young woman in the head in broad daylight, along with his wife Loretta Vance. Crystal was killed from her injuries, while Loretta was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. She ultimately succumbed to her wounds a few days later. The women were in separate cars when the shooting took place, and James had no reason to think that they knew each other. But that apparently did not matter when he decided to pull the trigger during an argument with his wife, right as Crystal pulled up between the fighting pair in her vehicle. James was arrested later that day on suspicion of 2 counts of murder. Records show that he was later convicted and charged, and is now serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole.
And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content.
1. Viridiana Moreno Vasquez. On what started off as an ordinary day in Veracruz, Mexico in May 2022, 31-year-old Viridiana Moreno Vasquez said goodbye to her family and left home in the town of Cardel to go to a job interview. When she failed to come back, her loved ones got worried and reported her missing. A few days later, the young woman's body was discovered murdered and mutilated beyond recognition. Investigators found Moreno's ID laying on the ground nearby and confirmed the identity of the remains through DNA evidence. According to state prosecutors, Moreno was lured to a fake job interview through an online ad for a secretary position that paid around $90 per week. The ad was posted by a Facebook account listed under the name Mary Madison, which investigators think was being used by a serial killer to lure potential job-seeking women to their deaths. Just 2 months before, a 22-year-old woman was killed in the state of Morelos after agreeing to meet up at a local cafeteria for an interview. The killer somehow convinced her to go to a nearby barbershop, where she was then murdered, and the victim's body was located 3 days later. She had been beaten and strangled. Detectives believe they most likely had a serial killer on their hands after realizing that Moreno and the first victim disappeared under eerily similar circumstances. Both women met up with the suspect in busy public places and willingly went with him to more private places, most likely because they were tempted by the job offer and perhaps because the suspect seemed to be trustworthy. According to prosecutors in Morelos, the suspect has used many different fake names over more than a decade-long span, including Juan Carlos Gasparin and Greek Roman Villalobos. He had been wanted on charges for attacking a woman back in 2012, but it's unclear how far back the crimes actually go. In addition to the 2 murders in Veracruz and Morelos, authorities believe the suspect may be linked to several murders in the states of Querétaro and Puebla. Shortly after the death of Moreno, investigators tracked the suspect down in northern Mexico. He was arrested alongside a female companion, but it's unclear whether or not the woman is suspected of being involved in the murders. Since then, authorities have remained tight-lipped about the identity of the accused killer, as well as the status of his criminal charges.
Number 8. David Chiselton. In February 2019, a Cleveland-based defense lawyer was sucker-punched by his client after being sentenced to 47 years in prison. The lawyer representing 42-year-old David Chiselton was Aaron Brockler. Chiselton was facing charges regarding an incident that took place in 2017. The police were called on Chiselton after a domestic violence disturbance led to a fire breaking out at an apartment complex. According to WKYC, the fire caused significant damage to the building, and several families were displaced as a result. At Chiselton's sentencing hearing with Judge Nancy Margaret Russo, everything went wrong. Brockler spoke with NBC following the incident and explained what happened. He said that after Chiselton received his 47-year sentence, he turned to his client to let him know that he would meet with him privately to see if they could reduce his prison time. However, before Brockler could even open his mouth, everything went black. The next thing he remembers is waking up on the floor of the courtroom. When Brockler regained consciousness, he said that he could see officers attempting to subdue his client. The lawyer then understood that he'd just been knocked out cold by Chiselton, who was less than pleased with his sentencing. Luckily, Brockler only suffered a minor concussion and a busted nose, but things could have been a lot worse. In 2021, Brockler chose to press charges against Chiselton for his violent outburst, and he also also sued two sheriff's deputies who were responsible for securing the courtroom. Brockler's lawsuit accuses Raymond Moran and Jeffrey Turner Jr., Cuyahoga County Sheriff's deputies, of wanton misconduct for handcuffing Chiselton with his hands in front of his body instead of cuffing them behind his back. Brockler also accused Chiselton of battery and assault. The 5-page complaint, which was filed in Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court, seeks a whopping $600,000 in damages. Unfortunately, the outcome of the case is unclear, and it may be ongoing, as the last update was in February 2021. Number 7. Blindsided. A lawyer from Christchurch, New Zealand, was completely blindsided when his client, a high-security prisoner, stood up and attacked him in the middle of a courtroom in 2019. Public defender Tony Gregg was sitting next to the offender as he was convicted for assaulting a prison officer. The judge appointed to the case asked the criminal to return to the dock for sentencing, and as he began to stand up, he punched Gregg in the face. The lawyer was hit so hard that he was sent flying off his chair and landed on the ground. After the incident, Gregg spoke with reporter Tom Kitchen and said that he never saw the punch coming. After the assault, the offender was wrestled to the ground by two corrections officers, and the judge adjourned the hearing. Gregg was taken to the Justice Precinct, where he was treated by a nurse who put butterfly stitches on the wound above his eye. The lawyer wholeheartedly believes that the attack was unavoidable. This was apparently the first time in 20 years that he'd been punched by a client. Although Gregg would have likely preferred not to have been assaulted in a courtroom, he was happy with the way the Ministry of Justice, Police, and Corrections responded. Unlike many other lawyers in his position, Gregg decided not to press charges against his client, who wasn't named in the article. Number 6. Xing Xing. An immigration lawyer from Queens, New York, was stabbed to death by a client in March of 2022. After serving a year and 8 months in Beijing, China's Quinsheng prison in the early 90s for participating in the pro-democracy protests in Tiananmen Square in 1989, 66-year-old Jim Lee moved to the United States. In order to make a better life for himself, Lee became an immigration lawyer. According to Lee's friend Wayne Zhu, who spoke with CNN, Lee often served the members of his community by providing them with pro bono services. Unfortunately, Lee's life came to an abrupt end in early 2022 when the lawyer was stabbed 4 times in the body and neck by a 25-year-old woman named Xing Xing. According to the New York Police Department, Lee was transported to Elmhurst Hospital, but sadly he was pronounced dead the same day. Xing had apparently been a client of Lee's, but investigators are still unclear what led to the attack. Detective Adam Navarro told CNN that 2 knives were recovered at the scene of the crime. Wayne Zhu reported that Lee and Xing got into a verbal altercation on March 11th regarding the woman's asylum case. This tiff between the pair resulted in a response from the police, but Lee told the authorities to let Xing go because he didn't want her to be arrested. Then 3 days later, on March 14th, Xing came back with 2 knives, and she had the intent to kill Lee. Xing has since been charged with second-degree murder and 2 counts of criminal possession of a weapon in the 4th degree, but she has yet to be sentenced for her crimes. Number 5. Peter Haer. A disgruntled client punched his lawyer in the face at Scott County Circuit Court in Georgetown, Kentucky in February 2008. Things escalated into violence in the courtroom after Judge Rob Johnson denied defendant Peter Haer's request for a new attorney. 30-year-old Haer from the city of Cynthiana told the judge that he didn't trust Doug Crickmer, his court-appointed lawyer, and as Judge Johnson began to explain to the defendant that he couldn't pick his public defender, Haer threw his first punch at Crickmer. After he landed his first blow, Haer continued to attack his lawyer, hitting him several times in the stomach and face. Luckily, before he could do more damage, Haer was tackled to the ground by security and was restrained. Following the incident, Crickmer was taken to the Georgetown Community Hospital, but he was released that same day after being treated for his wounds. Crickmer stated that he wasn't planning on pressing assault charges against Haer. When interviewed on NBC's Today Show, Crickmer said that he didn't blame Haer for his physical outburst and that he didn't wish him any ill will. He stated that he felt like Haer was frustrated at his situation and that he just snapped. In June of 2007, Haer was arrested for burglarizing a Kmart store and Crickmer was appointed to be his lawyer. However, after everything happened, Haer eventually got his way and he was given a new attorney. Number 4. Nando Perez. A divorce attorney was found stabbed to death in his office in Jackson Heights, Queens in August of 2021. 65-year-old Charles Zolot was discovered at about 6 a.m. on August 5th in a second-floor office by a custodian. The lawyer was found with multiple stab wounds and his face was bloodied from the attack. At first, investigators kept their eye on Zolot's 66-year-old brother, but after a while he was found innocent. The real culprit was ultimately identified later that month as 64-year-old Nando Perez, a former client of Zolot. Apparently, Perez was dissatisfied over a home foreclosure and he blamed everything on Zolot. He'd even visited Zolot at his office before the stabbing to yell at him. The investigation into the murder revealed that Perez and his brother had entered the office building with Zolot the night before his body was found, which was caught by surveillance cameras. When the lawyer was discovered by cleaning staff, an autopsy showed that Zolot had been stabbed over 20 times. According to Melinda Katz, Queens District Attorney, the brutal crime stunned the local community. Attorney Mark Drucker commented on the tragic incident and explained that, as a lawyer, you're always scared that a disgruntled client could get really upset with you. Unfortunately, Zolot happened to face the worst-case scenario. Perez was ultimately charged with second-degree murder as well as criminal possession of a weapon. If he's convicted of the crime, he could face 25 years to life behind bars. Number 3. Lar S Ward. A man that was accused of robbing 4 different suburban convenience stores in New York was charged with assaulting his defense attorney at the Erie County Correctional Facility in September of 2022. Apparently, the criminal made several threats of violence toward his attorney, Joseph J. Terranova, during a court appearance that took place a week before the attack. The defendant, Lar S Ward, also allegedly threatened Terranova on the phone. The violent assault was captured on video by surveillance cameras at the Alden jail when Terranova met up with Ward to discuss the upcoming jury selection for his case. Terranova just wanted to go over material that was given to him by the Erie County District Attorney's Office. But according to defense attorney James Auricchio, who also happened to be in a meeting with one of his clients at the correctional facility, Ward was in a state of rage. Auricchio said that in his 22 years working as a lawyer, he'd never seen someone that violently out of control. The day before the altercation, Terranova called Ward and told him that he'd be there the next day. The inmate initially wanted to refuse the visit, but then the lawyer pointed out his client's looming trial. This was when Ward threatened Terranova and told him it would only take 4 punches to knock him out. When the lawyer showed up the following day, he informed the staff at the correctional facility about the threat that Ward had made toward him. Then Ward and Terranova met in a large room where plenty of other incarcerated people were meeting with their attorneys. There was even a guard posted at the door, but it wasn't enough to stop Ward. After speaking with the lawyer for a few minutes, Ward got so worked up that he pounded on the table before jumping at Terranova, punching him 3 or 4 times until he hit the floor. Thankfully, Terranova wasn't too hurt after being attacked. If there hadn't been any officers stationed in the room, things could have been a lot worse. Following the incident, Ward was indicted on 1 count of assault. If he's convicted of the charge, he'll face the maximum sentence of 7 years behind bars. Number 2. Lamont Payne. A public defender was punched in the face in a Phoenix courtroom by his client in 2018. Attorney Vladimir Gajic spoke with ABC 15 and claimed that the Office of Public Defense Services mistreated him after the incident. According to Gajic, a month or 2 after the courtroom assault, he was suspended from working as a contract attorney in Maricopa County. He also said that he was forced to return the $1,000 payment from the county to represent the client that attacked him, Lamont Payne. A spokesperson for the county told ABC 15 that Gajic was suspended due to several complaints about his lack of communication, but Gajic refuted the claim and said that he plans to sue. Gajic's former client apparently had a history with violence, and he lost his temper that day. Payne was agitated that Gajic wasn't speaking up for him during the hearing, and the judge had to ask him multiple times to stop speaking out of turn. However, he continued to complain, so the judge decided that he should be removed from the room. As Payne stood up to be escorted out of the courtroom by security, he turned to Gajic and punched him right in the face. Payne was in court regarding a charge from 2016 where he assaulted a corrections officer. He ended up pleading guilty to assaulting Gajic in May of 2019 and is currently being held at a parish detention facility located in Louisiana. Payne's sentencing remains unclear. Number 1. Francisco Sanchez. An attorney was killed by one of his clients inside his law office in Goldsboro, North Carolina, in an apparent murder-suicide that took place in December 2022. The shooting that claimed 42-year-old Patrick White's life took place inside the Riddle and Brantley law firm. White, as well as his client, 46-year-old Francisco Sanchez, were found dead inside the office building. According to authorities, Sanchez shot White and killed him before he turned the gun on himself, ending both of their lives. At around 9:30 a.m. that same morning, Sanchez and his wife Crystal Guerrero visited White's office for a mediation. However, because of attorney-client privilege, the details of the mediation were not disclosed. But we do know that attorney Gene Riddle was assisting with the Sanchez-Guerrero mediation and that White was the attorney of record for the case. Riddle was questioned after the tragic incident and he said, "I'm still trying to process it." According to him, there was little warning of the violence that was to come. Riddle claimed that the meeting with Sanchez and his wife was routine and everyone seemed happy with the outcome they reached later that day. But after everything was finalized, Guerrero asked to speak with Sanchez alone while Riddle, White, and the mediator headed back to their own offices in the building. When a few moments had passed, Riddle turned to see Sanchez running in his direction, and then he heard gunshots. Riddle thought he'd been shot, so he fell backward into his office. But then, Sanchez turned his sights on White, who was standing nearby. White tried to stop Sanchez from continuing to shoot up the place, but unfortunately he was fatally shot in the process. Just a few minutes later, another shot was heard, and Sanchez was found on the floor with a self-inflicted bullet in his head. Riddle believes that Patrick died trying to save his friends and co-workers, and he'll forever be remembered as a hero.
Thanks for watching. Which would be worse, having a bird poop on your head while you are on your way to an interview, or showing up to a job interview with a black eye? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.